Okay, so today I have come in with an abundance of peppermint. That is in its full glory right now. And part of the Medicine Maker shares, each of you are getting a half a pound of peppermint to play with. And what I decided to teach you as yet another thing that you can do with your herbs, and this could be applied to lots of herbs. We make lots of these here, are herbal syrups. Basically, we make a simple syrup solution, and we use cane sugar. It's a way to preserve the herb, preserve some medicinal quality, but really make something that's yummy, tasty, that gives people a really nice way, really nice palatable way to be introduced to the idea of taking herbs internally that are otherwise either too pungent or too bitter or too aromatic for the average person's taste buds. And really, when we make syrups for people and they put a little bit of the syrup in seltzer water or in their mixed drink or in their tea, they're blown away by how yummy they are. And they do have medicinal quality depending on how strong you make them. So today we're going to make peppermint simple syrup, and we're going to prepare by stripping the leaves off the stems. And if I'm using a full 8 ounces, which you do not have to do, but if I'm using a full 8 ounces of peppermint, if I strip the stems off, that leaves me with about 4 ounces of plant material that I end up using in my recipe. So before I go too far with stripping, I just want to talk about my ingredients a little bit. So I've talked to you about water and the importance of a clean water supply. And if you have, for example, a lot of chlorine in your water, you might want to let that water sit out overnight to allow some of that chlorine to dissipate off before you use it in your recipe. The other thing that we use, and we've gotten a lot of questions about this, we use certified organic raw cane sugar in our syrups, and there's a few reasons why. One, it would be cost prohibitive if we were to use maple syrup or if we were to use honey or agave syrup. They're all fairly expensive, and it would make our products so much more expensive to buy. It would make it more expensive for you to make. But there's some other more practical reasons that we use cane sugar, and that is, one, we can generally determine that we're going to have a reliable product every time. Honey, there's just a lot of variation. Maple syrup, there's a lot of variation in moisture levels. With evaporated cane sugar, we know exactly the amount of moisture that we need to work with to make our percentages just right. And we generally like to make a 50% simple solution, which is 50% water, 50% sugar. And that water has been strongly infused with herbs. And that's the basic recipe that we use for all of our syrups that we make here at Barefoot Botanicals. So for you, I know that a number of you don't want honey, for example. And so that is another reason why it might be a good idea to not use it, is because it's the product of an animal. So it's the product of bees. I know it's technically not an animal, but if you're vegan, any living thing that's producing a product, you want to avoid using that product. So although I consider plants living things, it's still not considered the same within the world of vegan. So it's not a living thing with eyes and ears, nose, whatever. So sugar is a nice alternative. It's also very clean tasting. It's not going to impart its own flavor onto the finished product. And with the simple syrups, we really want the flavor of the herbs to come through as much as possible. So that's probably the biggest reason that we like to use the cane sugar, because it's a very clean, unobtrusive sweetener that is not going to impart its own flavor onto the finished product. So that's what we're going to use. And so what we're doing is we're taking about 4 ounces of plant material, and we're going to be doing about 1 part plant material to 4 parts water, and then that water is going to be doubled by the sugar. So basically we're going to have 1 part plant material to 4 parts water to 4 parts sugar, if that makes any sense. So 4 ounces of plant material to 16 ounces of water, and then another 16 ounces of sugar. So we're hoping this all fits in the pot. So I'm going to go ahead and just start. The way we make it is we actually heat the water with the herb up to about 180 degrees, and then we let it steep. So we don't bring it to a full boil, but I'm gonna go ahead and heat it with the plant material in there, and I'm gonna strip the stems off of the plant material so that we have less of them in our way, because they're not gonna be as aromatic as the leaves themselves. And we'll just take some time to strip. Okay, so I finished separating the leaves from the stems, and I put most of it in my pot, but I reserved some for at the end when I want to kind of super infuse my finished product with a little bit more of the aromatics without as much of the heat. So I'm going to add, because I have essentially 4 ounces that I'm using of plant material, I'm going to go ahead and add 16 ounces of water. And so I'm going to pour that off. And that is going to be 2 cups worth of water. And I'm going to end up cooking that. The mint is going to cook down a little bit as it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on to high. And I want to keep an eye on it because I don't want to, I don't want it to come to a boil. And meanwhile, while that is heating up, I'm going to go ahead and measure out my sugar. And actually, I have a bag here of sugar that I'm going to take from. And what I want is 1 pound of sugar or 2 cups. So I'm going to measure that out and add that to the pot. And you can add this after you strain it off, but just for ease of making it, I'm going to add it all at the same time. And I'm going to go ahead and get my chopstick and just stir it a little bit. Okay, so this has been cooking. It actually started to simmer a little bit, and I'm afraid that it's getting quite a bit close, if not higher than the 180, so I'm going to check my temperature very quickly. It actually seems like it's boiling a little bit, so. All right, I'm gonna pull it off the heat because I'm at 195 degrees. So I'm gonna let this cool for a second. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna strain it, and then I'm gonna put it back into my pot. I'm not gonna turn the heat back on, and I'm gonna just add some fresh leaves to add some of the top notes to the aromatic, some of the top notes with a very highly aromatic quality to my ending syrup. The reason that I want to strain out what's in here now is the longer I let those sit in there, the more I'm going to get of some of those heavier tannins and bitter components that I'm otherwise trying to avoid in my syrup. I may want some bitters in my end syrup, but for this case, I want it to be light and bright and have the higher notes of the mint come through most clearly. So I think that it's cool enough. I'm going to go ahead and strain it out into my quart jar. So I basically have a really incredibly strong, sweet infusion. And I sometimes take anything that I have around to use to kind of press that out. All right, and then I'm going to put this back into my pot. And I'm going to actually use a cloth because I'm going to burn myself otherwise. And now is when I'm going to add the rest of the leaves. This is the other, really it's another 2 ounces or so of leaf. I'm I'm going to add that to my water, and I'm going to just kind of pat it down and very quickly put the lid on because I don't want to lose my aromatics. And I let this steep for about 10 minutes or so. Let that come off, and then okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. The fresh leaves have been steeping in our finished solution, and so I'm going to go ahead and strain that again. And I brought out some fancy bottles because I'm going to give these as gifts. Now, you don't have to use fancy bottles. You can just use pint jars, or I don't recommend using recycled lids necessarily, but you can use recycled jars that you have new lids for, because you don't want any bacterial contamination if possible, because this is a 50% solution, 50% sugar solution, which means it's only going to last a few weeks in your fridge unless you increase the percentage of sugar to bring it up to about 70%. What we do here at the farm is we actually add a little bit of citric acid to bring the pH down to between 4 and 4.5. If the pH is above 4.5, it can start to ferment. And it may not for you. When you hot pack it, you're actually doing quite a bit of sterilization of your bottles in the process. So it may last without opening, it may last indefinitely in your fridge or on your regular shelf. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready to strain out what I have here. And I think even though I used this bottle a few minutes ago, it doesn't have any residual leaves on it. So I'm going to go ahead and use it without washing it. And I'm going to go ahead and pour. It smells so good. Now, it looks very, very liquidy, but I can assure you that once it cools, it's going to be more syrupy in consistency. Again, I'm going to kind of press out the leaves a bit. Now this liquid also has the water from the leaves themselves. So when you cook the leaves in the syrup, the cellular water comes out into the solution. So once again, I'm going to use my rag, and I'm going to pour this right away, because when I pour it, it's going to essentially serve to sterilize my bottles as well. Well, I have a little bit left. I'm going to go ahead and top this off. And if you have a little bit more than this, perhaps you'll have some mojitos later. Now these are cork tops, but if you have the kinds of bottles that have screw tops, you can use those. What I suggest you do is flip the bottle upside down to sterilize the inside of your bottle all the way through. We worked with a nutrition scientist from Del Valle University, which is right down the road from us, and she kind of helped teach us little tricks of the trade to help improve our preservability of our products, and this was one. She also taught us about using the pH papers to determine the pH of our product to make sure that we had shelf stability even without adding additional sugar, which was my goal. Then you'd want to label your gifts, and you're ready to go. So the way you would want to take these internally is you can have a tablespoon of syrup per 16 ounces of seltzer water. That's how we typically take them in. You could also use the syrup as a base in a vinaigrette. You can use the syrup as a soak on a dessert. You can use the syrup straight all by itself if you need to settle someone's tummy and you need to get some herbs into them, but they won't take any other medicine. So peppermint is just such a versatile flavor that you can use a lot of different ways, and this is a really versatile way to get it into someone.